Well, welcome again to Earlswood, a Baptist Church house group online. We're going to take a look at Mark chapter 9 now, before we take a summer break for a few weeks. And this first half of Mark 9 describes a rather startling transfiguration of Jesus. Always been an amazing story when you read it. And of course there's another healing to go with it. Our reading is Mark chapter 9, verses 2 to 29, and we're going to follow that with a short video that makes some explanation of the transfiguration.
After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain, where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He didn't know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud. "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. And they asked him, "Why do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus replied, "To be sure, Elijah does come first and restores all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected? But I tell you, Elijah has come, and they have done to him everything they wished, just as it is written about him." When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. "What are you arguing with them about?" he asked. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "You unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus. "Everything is possible for one who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" He replied, "This kind can come out only by prayer."
This is Jared Dees from thereligionteacher.com. The Transfiguration is one of the most important and significant events in the Gospels. It's in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And in that story, Jesus takes his 3 closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, up a mountain. And Luke says up a mountain to pray. And there it says Jesus was transfigured. His face was shown bright. He was clothes became dazzling white, and then two important figures from the Old Testament appear by his side and start having a conversation with him. The first is, of course, Moses, and the other is the prophet Elijah. And so, what is the significance of those two being there at the Transfiguration? Moses is, of course, the giver of the law, and Elijah is one of the most significant prophets, showing that Jesus is the fulfillment of both the law and the prophets. Another important point is that Moses and Elijah both encountered God, experienced the presence of God on Mount Sinai, or for Elijah, it was called Mount Horeb. The same mountain, they were there together, experiencing God. For Moses in the presence of the burning bush, and Elijah, that still small voice, that silent sound outside of the mountain, showing that here, God is also present. God is experienced in the Transfiguration. And to make that point even clearer, what happens? A cloud comes, and from the cloud, the voice says, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." So the significance of the Transfiguration here isn't just that Jesus is on par with Moses and Elijah. He's the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. And he is the presence of God on earth. He's the Son of God. And what does the Lord say? Listen to him. He fulfills the law and the prophets. Of course, we're listening to the law of the prophets, but what does the voice say? The presence of God. Listen to him. And so for us today, as we read this story, the question is, do we recognize Jesus as the presence of God here in the world? And are we willing to listen to him? Go make disciples. God bless.
That video draws out Jesus as the fulfillment of all that's gone before, the fulfillment of the aims of Israel. He's the fulfillment of the law, and hence Moses stands with him, and the fulfillment of the prophets, hence Elijah stands with him. And Jesus is also seen as the presence of God on earth. Really, simply we say the Son of God, don't we? Because they're standing there at the very place where Moses and Elijah had experienced God's presence in the burning bush in a small still voice. This whole passage does raise an interesting question, doesn't it, about how Moses and Elijah could actually be there with Jesus when they were dead. Did it really happen? Or perhaps this is very much a vision that the disciples see. I don't think it matters. The message out of it is very much the same. I think the great thing out of this is it's an encouragement, isn't it? It was an encouragement for Jesus, encouragement as he sets his face towards Jerusalem and all the horrors that are going to follow. For the disciples, it was an encouragement as they came to terms with Jesus' new teaching about the cross. And they too experienced God in a new way they've never seen before. And for us, perhaps we need to listen to the words, "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him." And after that, there's another healing. And just picking out two slightly different things about this healing, there's a prayer of the Father. "I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief." Isn't that just like us most of the time? And we can be encouraged that Jesus answers this prayer. And this kind can only come out by prayer. We're not necessarily involved in casting out evil spirits, but it is a reminder of the total and centrality of prayer in our Christian lives. I need to be reminded of that, and I'm sure we all do. In house group, we're going to spend some time again waiting on God. Or perhaps you'd like to do that a bit at home too. A couple of ideas. You could imagine that you're with the disciples on the mountain. What's your reaction to Jesus and the Transfiguration and the events that follow? And consider the words, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. Does that speak into my life? Hope that is of help to you and a challenge to you, and we'll see you next time.